Hello, everyone. Another week. This time we're looking at formative assessment here in Read 437. What follows is I'm going to go over the next assessment task that we have together, as well as set up the work we're going to do for the next couple of weeks. As with most of the assignments in this class, the actual foundational aspect of the task is actually quite simple. In this case, you're going to design, deliver, and analyze a written assessment of student understanding in order to attend to student learning and instructional needs. We'll come back to the specifics about that in a second, but after this presentation, I do want you to take a very close look at the assignment instructions, and you'll see the assignment is really up to you. It's really about finding an opportunity inside of your own curriculum to give an assessment. And that may already exist, or it may need to be created. But the key piece here is I want it embedded. I don't want you to create something solely for the sake of this class, but to actually inform your understanding of your own work in your classroom. And the only other requirement I have beyond that is that it include or stem from reading, so that we not move too far away from the use of a text. So, as always, really the complexity of the work we're going to do this class is inside of what we're doing with the data we generate and how we go about reporting it. So while the task itself is going to be simple, largely in control, the complexity comes, if you read the directions, from how you're going to report out about it. So this time the three differences are really going to be inside of the findings, analysis, and recommendations. And what you're going to do in the findings section this time is we're going to talk about your data in relation to your learning goals. Last time I asked you to think about analytical questions, things you might want to know from the data. In this case, we're actually kind of you're providing yourself with the questions you're going to ask because you're going to set up learning goals inside of your instruction, right? You're already going to be teaching towards certain objectives, towards certain standards, etc. So you can imagine how easy it is to think about those as analytical questions. You also have overarching goals in your classroom, or a unit, or a period of instruction that you are trying to attend to, and those are really going to be your analytical questions this time. So the findings section, and there's more detail inside of the assignment, is really going to be about tallying up and using student work to describe those students' progress towards those learning goals. The analysis section is going to be about applying a theory, which I'm going to get to in a second, to analysis of student learning. We're going to be thinking about the why component here very specifically, and I'll talk a bit about how we're going to do that. And then finally, we're going to talk about how you respond instructionally based on the data. So what I'm looking for you to do is actually to use that data to inform immediate next steps in your teaching, as well as thinking about the long-term implications. So this gives us a good opportunity to think about just the sheer basics of assessment. I know you guys have heard these terms 1,000 times over, formative assessment and summative assessment, and I'm sure you've heard a multitude of definitions, and if you've ever been in professional development with other teachers, it's sometimes surprising what seems elemental and obvious to us actually can be wide-ranging and may be in a way confusing. I've heard a lot of different ways of describing it. I really think the easiest way to think of the difference is that summative is an assessment of learning and formative is assessment for learning. And if you think about it that way, it's actually not about what and how you use to assess. About the type. Excuse my language. It's not about what type of assessment you give, but how you use the assessment. In other words, formative assessment tends to be set up as in regards to like the format, right? You think about exit slips, or you think about using discussion or small group guided reading where you're asking questions of students. You think about those as formative assessment. And summative assessment is a project or a paper or a unit test. And the reality is that all those things could be the other thing depending on how they're actually used. You could use a end of chapter test, for instance, to determine what you're going to reteach, and in that case it would actually be quite formative rather than used simply as a mark or a grade. So you can see this quote here kind of lays this out. This is from a book called The Handbook on Formative Assessment. And again, this idea here about providing feedback in relationship to goals, and then also about this idea about what is to be done. Formative is really about informing instruction. And I think we don't always put it that way. We often talk about student learning, which is really important, of course, and is essential here. But another way to look at formative is that it informs instruction. And that's really the goal here with this assignment. I really want to do an assessment that helps us think more strategically about our instruction. And I know many of you are probably already doing that in your PLC, so this would be a good opportunity to extend on and build that work. So, in the analysis section of this paper, you're going to utilize an analytical framework, a theoretical framework, if you will, in order to sort of raise questions about why students, the findings you found, why they occurred. In other words, we're looking for an explanation, a theory, if you will, for students' performance. So if you look at this diagram, which is pretty blank right now, I want you to take a look at it and pause the video, if you will, or just marinate on it for a second. I'm going to give a pregnant pause in a second here, and think about, what do each of these circles represent? What are they in reference to? What would be context in this case? What would involve the learner in this case? And what aspects of reading and writing performance would be skilled or on a continuum of skilled? So ponder what might go into those pieces. Good. I'm going to change slides in 1 second. So if you haven't had a chance to sort of process that, pause and then do so. So here we are with a more elaborated idea of the interactive approach. And in it, you can see in the context, and if you had my class last semester, you know we've talked about these terms quite a bit. This is a more simplified version of some of the models we saw, but in this case, context includes the setting, i.e. the learning environment. It includes the instruction itself. It includes the instructional resources, materials. You might think of, say, Just Write Books, for instance, would be an example of the context. The learner, as we talked about last semester too, about the cognitive reader piece, right? What do they know? What attitudes do they have? And motivation, we surveyed that last time. Then you can see in skilled reading and writing performance, you can see the various aspects of performance, right? And those include things like comprehension, vocabulary development, word identification, etc. So you can see here that the interaction between context and learner in this theory produces the level of performance. And that's really what our goal here is in the analysis, is to take the data of the performance and try to back map and say, well, what was going on in the interaction that might have led to those performances. So thinking about that, I have 2 things I want you to be thinking about this week. First off, you're going to need to either design or determine this assessment. I suspect many of you already have things in place, and that's great. And it's a formative piece, so you're going to have to decide to you, what is it that is a snapshot of students' learning that you can use to inform instruction. There's a variety of different ways to do that. The only requirement I'm really making here is that it's something that students write down their responses. So simply doing a check of understanding in an oral discussion is not sufficient for this assignment. But what you do need to think about is what you want this assessment to measure. When I say writing assessment or assessment of writing, by writing assessment, I mean that writing is simply the form, the same way asking a student a question verbally, right, or doing a speaking and listening assignment, etc., is another form of an assessment. In this case, the writing assessment would be used to assess students' knowledge or skills of some content. So you might ask students to write a paragraph about their independent reading, for instance, or do an exit slip about the science lab they completed, etc. And in that case, you would be utilizing it for writing to learn purposes. In other words, you would be looking to see what students know and can do about whatever it is you've been teaching them. That's a little bit different than an assessment of writing, which is specifically looking at students' writing skills. It might be actually looking at their grammar or looking at the evidence they use, etc. You can choose either one of those. I just want to be clear that when I call this a writing assignment, writing is merely the mechanism we're using to assess student understanding. You're going to need to make the choice about what it is about student understanding that you're measuring. The other piece I want you to think about here is I would highly recommend administering this assessment on Friday of this week, if not Thursday. The reason I'm suggesting you do so is that that'll give you the weekend to analyze the data more thoroughly than I think many of us do, right? We tend to look at our students' responses informally or for grading, and this assignment's going to ask you to spend more time with it. So doing it on Friday gives you the opportunity to spend more time with it and then make instructional decisions without having to turn it around as quickly. Thursday would work as well, but I want you to keep that in mind and see what makes sense for you on Friday in terms of what you plan on teaching, what you plan on having students do. You may already have an assessment in place, or you may just need to modify an existing assessment to capture students' thinking and doing and writing. So next steps, first of all, read the assignment directions thoroughly. Again, it's a simple task in of itself, but the actual demands of it are challenging. So I want to make sure you understand the full scope of the assignment. From there, I want you to check in with me by the end of the day on Wednesday and let me know how you intend to assess. Okay, so then we have an opportunity to talk it through. I want to make sure I can clear up any issues you're having with the assignment and or facilitating it, and then you can go and give it on Friday. While you're doing that, I need you to read Lipson and Wixon especially. This is where this interactive approach comes from. And in it, the pages that are given to you, one, gives you an overview of the interactive approach, and two, looks at the various factors that are involved in doing so. So this is going to give you some idea of thinking about the analysis section. And then the Fisher and Frey and Fisher pieces are really just examples of the way in which formative assessment, particularly writing, has been used in elementary or secondary, respectively, in order to inform teaching and learning. Finally, when you email me, please touch base with me as soon as possible, actually, on this. And let me know about when you want to have the discussion this week. Thursday evening worked best for everyone, and I'm more than happy to do the discussion on Thursday evening. It actually just changes what we discuss. If we do it Saturday morning and people have given the assessment, we can use it as an opportunity to process what we learned from giving the assessment. If we do it Thursday, and most of us haven't, we'll just talk about formative assessment and writing assessment more generally. So that'll just determine what it is we cover. All right, touch base if you have any questions, and looking forward to seeing what we're up to this week.